Hey, it's awesome to be here. I haven't been at ClioCon in some time, and it's really cool to be here being part of Clio. So I don't know how many of you, oh, thank you, yeah, awesome. I've known the Clio folks from the very beginning, and I've always been so impressed by Jack and team. So that as this deal started evolving, I'll tell you just a very quick story, the investment in Clio, this latest round, so if you missed it this morning, very big investment in Clio, very big investment in legal tech. And, but if we'll go back and we'll talk a little bit about this in my background, and if you don't even know who I am, I'm Mark Britton, and if you want to know anything about my background, use that Wi-Fi, look up LinkedIn. But I really started the business part of my career at Expedia, the travel company. And when the markets blew up, when the internet bubble blew up in the late 90s, we had to do a private investment with a private investor because we could not raise money in the public markets. We had gone public and still could not raise that money. So the investor that stepped in to do what's called a PIPE, a private investment in a public entity, was TCV. And that's how I met TCV in 1999, and we have had a long and wonderful relationship, including them being investors in Avo. And so when they called me and said, hey, what do you think of these Clio guys? I said, they're awesome. Let's see what we can do together. So here we are. We have this investment put together. And again, it's an investment in Clio, but I thought Jack put it so well. It's an investment in legal innovation. And so when Jack and I were chatting, and he was like, hey, so we talk so much about business principles and what you, Mark, have learned at being kind of that intersection of, being at the intersection of law and business. Do you want to come share it with the Clio faithful and talk a little bit about what you've learned? And I said, absolutely. And so I put together this speech. Here's the good and bad news. I've never given this speech before. So you get to see what I hope is some unique content, and then on the other side of that, I might just totally blow it. So we'll take that risky ride together. But I called this "Lawyers are from Mars, Business People are from Venus," and of course what I'm saying there is how lawyers think and how business people think is very different. And now some of the very astute in the crowd will say, well, hold on. Business people, that includes lawyers, right? And of course. But I'm cribbing from this book. Many of you will remember it from the 90s. It was a just massive bestseller. And it was this idea that, well, this John Gray, who wrote it, I didn't realize this until I was researching it for this speech. He actually was doing legal mediation when he wrote this book. And so I'm guessing he was working on a lot of family law issues because he came up with this hypothesis that how men and women communicate with each other, how they problem solve, how they kind of get through the world, they just approach things so differently because the tracks that they've come up on, whether it's socially or culturally or psychologically or even physiologically, are just fundamentally different. And you have to understand that wiring in order to understand how they can work together. They can communicate more effectively. So I've kind of stolen that concept to talk about some of the differences between lawyers on Mars and business people on Venus. Now, it's so much more than how they dress because, yes, stereotypically, you have the lawyers who wear suits much more often, and you have the business people who much more often have the colored hair, the hipster glasses, the untucked shirt, and they dress differently, but they also have that same difference in wiring, socially, culturally, psychologically, and even physiologically. I mean, when we talk about things like risk-taking, I really believe that it is fundamentally hard for a lot of lawyers, and it goes all the way down to that DNA, maybe we'll get down to the RNA, to say their desire to take risks is so much lower. So I want to talk about some of those differences, but as a setup, you know, my own background. So I took my trip from Mars to Venus when, as I mentioned, I joined Expedia. So I was at a large law firm, Preston Gates & Ellis. Some of you may have remembered this was one of the precursors to K&L Gates. This was Bill Gates' dad's law firm. So, and he was still a partner when I joined in 1999, I joined in 97. But I got cherry-picked. Well, maybe we'll just say I got hijacked. I don't know what I did. They asked me to come be Expedia's first general counsel in 1999. I was doing a lot of work helping them acquire a lot of companies. And Microsoft came to me and said, we have this new travel company that we're going to carve out, and we're going to take it public. We're going to create a separate company with that. Will you be the general counsel? And so I was so excited. Now, the only thing that was weird about it is I'd just become a partner at Preston Gates, and so I had to make that choice of giving up the golden ring, including equity partnership, in a big firm to go chase this new, and I mean, it was really new. This was 98, 99. This was the beginning of the internet. And I had to give that up to go say, okay, well, let's see what happens over there on planet Venus. So I jumped on my rocket. I went over, and I'm telling you, right off the bat, while it was fun, it was also just unbelievably shocking. And one of the things that was shocking about it right at the outset is that I was no longer treated as one of the revenue-generating assets, right? Like, at a law firm, everything revolves around you because you make the money. And then you show up in a company, and quite honestly, all you do is spend the money. And they just weren't excited about that. And I was just like, hey, like, what happened? I used to just be the star of the show. But the other thing that happened, which really gets us to the crux of the talk, is I found myself in these team meetings and surrounded by people. Now, this is a more modern picture, but they did kind of have the hipster vibe. Now, this was 1992, so we didn't have the man bun, we didn't have any beards. You know, the way you looked hip and techie, or not 92, this was 99. The way you looked hip in 99 is you usually had a polo with like the Microsoft logo, and then you had khakis and tennis shoes and a pager. That's how. You just rolled with that pager like, yeah. It's true. But still, within that, I found myself in these team meetings where I just could not believe how so in a law firm, quite often you'll have partners that they can pick up and take their practice at any time, and quite often they'll even compete against one another. And so I didn't find that in a big firm the conversations were as direct as they needed to be, and it felt like a lot of times things were going unsaid. Well, man, I dropped into the corporate world, and I'll tell you, everything was said. I mean, it was the Thunderdome. I went into meetings, and if you were not prepared for those meetings, you had product people seriously saying, and I've just excused the expletive, but that's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. And as a general counsel, you're like, how dare you? But it was the reality that they were saying, it's business now, and you need to be ready to go. But what I loved is when we left those meetings, and I would sit and reflect, we were all friends. There was all respect there after the fact, but there was an obsession, there was a compulsion to where they said, we have a mission. We have a target audience, we have a customer that we are going to collectively come together and serve every single day. And either get on the bus and do your homework or go someplace else. And over time, I absolutely loved that. And I became a student of it. And whether our CEO at the time was Rich Barton, who went on to start Zillow and Glassdoor and was an investor in Avo, and he started all sorts of other companies. Bill Gates, I got to spend quality time with Bill. I've met all sorts of other leaders that I've been able to study them and even study some of the historical leaders to the point where I've said, these people are iconic leaders, are monolithic leaders. They have some interesting traits that they all share. And so before I get into talking about those traits, I do want to say that some of you may be thinking, like, if we're going to talk about the business of law, I mean, am I really going to be Thomas Edison? Could we talk about something that's a little more applicable? But this is the cruel joke, and I just can't reinforce this enough times, that when you think about being on Mars and making it over to Venus as a business person at some point, the industry actually put you into deep freeze and shipped you over to Venus, and you didn't even know it. Now, they don't tell you that in law school. They don't tell you that when you take the bar exam. They seldom even tell you that in CLEs. And so you get people like Clio, like some of the thought leaders within this industry that will stand up and they will say to you, you're a business person now and you need to act like it. Now, often this is the reaction that I get, is like, I really have had people get very aggressive with me and say things like, if I wanted to be a business person, I would have gone to business school. And I just want to say to them, you're already a business person. You're there. Like, I can't, like, the thing I do is I'm like, here's your business license. The government thinks that you're a business. You think you're enough of a business that you played lawyer for yourself and filed it, and yet you're going to tell me you're not a business. My. The differences. Now, one thing, I'm sure there are some people here who are tremendous students of business, and when I talk about these traits, you're going to be like, you missed like 20 things. Sure. I am not trying to build a treatise here. I am trying to tell you about the things that I have seen that are truly unique for the greatest leaders and how they've pushed that into their organization so that they are as effective, as successful as they can be. So what are those attributes? I'm going to talk about each one of these. There's obsession, being obsessed with that customer. There's curiosity, being infinitely curious about the world around you. There's simplicity, boiling things down to their simplest purpose, to their simplest core. Opportunity, being opportunity spotters. Being risk takers, and as a consequence, being very comfortable with failure. And being great communicators. I'm going to break all of these down because if I were to ask a number of you what these pieces meant, I think you'd miss, because it's there's some nuances here, and that's really what I wanted to share with all of you. So let's start with obsession. So when we think about being obsessed as a business person, a lot of you think of the narrative of where you say, yeah, it's just about those crazy business people. They were so obsessed with their idea of building a business that they ran up all of their credit cards, and look, it just worked out for them. I don't know, just crazy. And it's almost this idea that the obsession is in the business and the money, and that they're willing, in almost a gambling, risk-taking way, to put it all on their credit cards, just let it all roll. I'm all in with my credit cards, and somehow they got lucky that a business came through. That's just not it at all. The obsession is in the customer. So think about these three people that I highlighted before. They did a lot of work before maybe the lightning struck. But you have Thomas Edison, who was a longtime scientist, before he realized that there was a path to get power and light into every single home in the United States. You have Bill Gates that really developed the concept of microcomputing to the point where he said, we are putting a stake in the ground for Microsoft to put a personal computer on every desk in the United States and the world. And then you have Amazon. You have Jeff Bezos, where his obsession is slightly different in that it wasn't in the product, but it was rather in the systems and the service that surrounded U.S. commerce and a lot of other products. And he said, we can serve U.S. commerce better. We can deliver products to anywhere, anyone at any time. And a lot of you might say, it hasn't turned out so hot because it just pushes U.S. consumerism or world consumerism. But the fact is, he's changed our lives by being obsessed and looking around the corner at that inefficiency and turning it into an opportunity. Staying on Bezos for a second, he is a unique beast. And I'm not sure that I don't spend really any time with Jeff, so I'm not going to pretend to be his best bud. But any time that I have spent with him, he is an intense person who believes more than anyone that consumer is everything to his company. There is nothing in any meeting they have ever to where the specter of the consumer is not present, where they're asking the question, whatever we build, whatever we do, is it the best thing for our customers? And so it's a beautiful thing, but I'll reiterate, and especially as we talk about lawyers, it's kind of a cool thing because he has taken existing processes, and by focusing on the customer, by focusing on the platform that he offers to sell goods and services, he's created a whole new paradigm as it relates to serving the customer in a really neat and efficient way. Now, in serving that customer and being obsessed about your product or your service or your platform or whatever you do that drives your business, what it is not primarily about is making money. And I love this quote where he says, DeShago says, people obsessed with making money often don't know how to make money. It's people obsessed with satisfying customers who know how to make money. And to give you maybe the most poignant example of this is, again, another monolith, and that is Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs, another just lunatic, right? I mean, there are all sorts of things in Steve Jobs' personal and even professional life, and I have a friend who was actually in his wedding, and some of the stories he tells about growing up with Apple, it's just shocking that they were ever successful. But there was a fundamental obsession coming from Jobs, and that was that they were going to move the economy forward by developing beautiful, amazing products that were so easy to use that personal computing would become something that was in everyone's hand, everywhere, and it would augment our lives to push us forward. Jobs was so obsessed with design that he wanted the insides of the Macintosh to be as beautiful as it was outside. And when he came back to really push, he was pushed out of Apple, then he came back, and when he came back, the first Macintosh looked like this, to where it was clear plexiglass so you could see the internal parts of the computer and how beautiful it was on the inside as well as the outside. That is obsession. Their obsession with design and simplicity, driving their products forward, it just, you can't find a better example than Jobs, even with all of his warts. Well, speaking of warts, let's talk about my experience really quickly. My own obsession, my own obsessive moment came from, so I was at Expedia, I moved to the business side, and after moving to the business side, I decided to punch out, and I took some time off, and I went and taught in Italy. I know, sucks, but it was wonderful. But I went and taught in Italy, and so my last stop at Expedia, even though I oversaw the legal team, I was the number 2 at Expedia, and a lot of what I worked on were business operations and finance. So not surprisingly, I was in Italy teaching finance, not law. And I had not been a real lawyer for many years, 3, 4, 5 years, and to where I was really down in the weeds and practicing. And yet it was surreal to me that I had friends and family, and these are smart, educated people that are calling me every time they have a legal issue. And I was like, this is so surreal. Nobody calls me about travel advice, and I was in the travel business for years. Why is this? And that's where the light bulb went off. I said, there just aren't super simple tools like Expedia for, instead of the travel trip, for the legal trip, right? Why don't we have those super simple tools? And I'm telling you, I got lit. I got so obsessed to the point where I took this picture because this is actually the view. I had an office, and this is actually shot from Piazzale Michelangelo for anyone that knows Firenze, but I had an office that would look over Florence at night, and I couldn't sleep. I'm telling you guys, every single night I was getting up in the middle of the night, and I'd go sit in that office, and I'd look over Florence, and I was like, I got to do it. I got to build this thing. I need to get back to Seattle and build this marketplace that helps consumers navigate the legal profession. And I believe it's that level of obsession that allowed me to hire the people from Expedia, which were our original engineers, and build the marketplace that became Avo, which became the largest legal marketplace in the world. So I'm super proud of that, but I just feel almost like there was divine intervention with that obsession to where it hit me and said, we got to move. So this is one of the places when we think about Venus versus Mars and how we get lawyers from here to here, it feels very distant. And a lot of lawyers will say to me, well, listen, I got into the profession because I didn't know what else to do. Or you'll have a lot of lawyers say, yeah, I got a job. I can't do all this highfalutin business stuff. Like, I'm busy in court and practicing. Okay, but as I said in a number of the podcasts that I spoke on today, you can listen to all of them should you want to follow up, but you got to get started somewhere. And I really want to hearken back to the Steve Jobs proposition. And, maybe you absolutely, the lucky ones in the room are the ones that, I don't know, it could be anything. I was a public defender, I was a police officer, and I saw how people were treated, and I said that I wanted to do criminal defense. I mean, I don't know where inspiration comes from, and then a lot of you just didn't have that inspiration. It's okay. But the question is now, can you get obsessed about something as a leader for your organization, as a business person, and say, whether it is our marketing or our operations or our legal product or whatever it is, that we are going to be obsessed about being the absolute best we can be in serving our customers? Can you get fired up and obsessed in that way? Because that is the level of obsession that you need. Again, don't have to be struck by lightning, but you need to push. You need to get obsessed to say, we are going to build the best damn law firm that this area of law, that this city, that this locale has ever seen. Curiosity. Now, curiosity is something, so if you ask a lot of people, like, what do you think is an attribute of a very successful business leader? And they'll say that they're really smart. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that I've spent a lot of time with a lot of business leaders that you've read about in the newspaper, and they're not that smart. I'm just being honest. They're not smarter than most of the people that are in this room, but they're obsessed. They are on a mission. They have seen something, and they are pursuing it like a bloodhound, one. And two, they're super curious people. And I love this quote. I'll have a couple of quotes from Einstein. Einstein blows me away because so this quote, I have no special talent. I'm only passionately curious. I mean, don't you think we would think of Einstein as pretty smart? But he just said, no, the way that you arrive at intelligence is that you're constantly, whether it's in the micro or the macro, you're trying to learn how everything works. And this is something that I really see just again and again. The people that I'm just blown away by in business are the ones that everything they encounter, to the extent that they find it interesting, they want to know everything about it. They're big readers, and they're big question askers. So I don't know how often you'll spend time with somebody that you might think of as intelligent, and they'll just ask you question after question about that thing that you mentioned that got their attention. Because they're so unbelievably curious, and as a question, they learn so much by listening to others, and then they're able to fuse some of the concepts that they've heard and put them together. Now, as we think about this organizationally, Microsoft was so good at this. Microsoft had this philosophy that everyone in the company had a voice, and that it was critical for leaders to ask many questions to get feedback from the organization, but they were really also focused on teaching us how to listen as leaders. And my boss, Rich Barton, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Rich, but he's one of the most generous, curious people that I know. He was so good at asking the questions, but also listening. And as I watched, I realized that what Rich and other great leaders are doing is they're building feedback loops, right? They've taken some sort of action, they're asking questions to get the reaction, and then that allows them to modify for the next action. And this boils all the way down that if leaders are very good about asking those questions and listening and then modifying based on that so that you have this loop, this virtuous cycle, you start to see the creativity bubble up within the organization to where people start saying, like in product, this is product testing. This is why you go out and ask people who use your products, like, how are we doing, right? Feedback loops. And I'll give you some examples of feedback loops in your own firms. But I touched on this, but I want to reinforce it because it tells a pretty funny story. That idea of anyone in the organization having a voice, I think, is super important. For anyone that works with you in your organization to feel that they can come to you or stand up in a meeting and say, I'm curious, I want to learn more, I want to understand more. If you don't create a culture within your firm, like if you're curious, you're going to want to hear what they have to say. But if you're not curious and you just want to hear from a select few, you create a culture where you're not going to hear from some of the most important people. And it's why organizational diversity is so important, because you need to bring people into your organization that have different points of view. And when people stand up and say, hey, Mr. Lead Lawyer, Managing Partner, CEO, you suck, well, let's have a conversation because it's important that I understand why you're saying this. Now, I'll give you one of my kind of seminal moments. Go back to 1999, and I was using a computer that was just about this sweet, and I sent out my first proclamation. I was so proud of myself. I remember where I was sitting, but I sent out my first proclamation to the company. It doesn't matter what it was. And saying, okay, you have a new general counsel in town, and we're going to do it like this. And I remember getting a bunch of email back, but in particular, an engineer sent me an email that basically said, that's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. And I was so indignant. I remember being like, it came back. I mean, it was a paragraph this long. I'm like, how did he write that so quickly? But it came back, and it basically tore apart my entire argument as to why we weren't going to do what I had proclaimed as a general counsel, what we were going to do. And I was so indignant, but over time, I can't remember if I chatted with Rich or anybody else, but I came to realize that this person felt that they had a voice. And that's what was key. And for me to have my feedback loops, it was critical that I listened and learned, and that helped me be a better general counsel. Now, there's a balance in this, and I'll just leave you with the thought that just because everyone have a voice doesn't mean everyone should speak. Love the t-shirt, should have worn that more often, but it's your job to give everyone a voice and be smart about filtering out those that are asking the most complex, most meaningful questions. Okay, quick feedback loops. Team meetings. Do you get your team together as a firm on a regular basis? Whether that's 5 people or one-on-one, do you get people together and talk to them on a weekly basis? Exit interviews for employees or for clients, asking them, why are you leaving? What have we done right? What have we done wrong? Picking up the phone, it's the most baffling thing. How many lawyers have a tough time picking up the phone and asking their customers, how are we doing? How did we do on this project? And I'll just skip down to end of project surveys. So you can send out, I used to get these all the time, especially from really business savvy firms that said, hey, we finished this chunk of work. Why don't you give us some feedback on how we're doing? In passing, I'll touch on this a little bit more later, but I cannot stress enough the value of just when you're walking down that hall and you're seeing people all the way from an admin to a paralegal to whomever within your firm, stopping them and saying, hey, how's it going? What are you working on? Is it going well? Do you understand what we're trying to do? Do you feel like we're pursuing our objectives? And then soliciting reviews. This is something that just so many lawyers just loathe, is the whole internet thing and the whole review thing. Well, you might not want to party on the internet, but send it out as part of the survey and actually put it into a really simple box of ask them to rate you from 1 to 10. And again, that just makes so many of you, it makes your skin crawl. You're just like, no, I'm not going to do it. All right, don't get the feedback. Let's talk about simplicity. We'll go back to Einstein again. Now, anybody who follows me on Twitter, who has for a long time, when Twitter used to have wallpaper, you might remember that I had this quote on my Twitter wallpaper. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. Now, there is a bit of irony in that statement because he probably could have just said, keep it simple. But still, it is this trait that I have seen in every business leader that really does a great job, to where they take the most complex things. So they've been obsessed. They have really focused on the complex in their obsession. They've been super curious to understand all the elements, but they're so good about boiling it down to the simple. We'll talk again about Apple and Steve Jobs. In 2007, this was the personal digital assistant. This was the Palm computer that was crushing everyone. RIM Technologies, man, no one could tip these guys over. I had one of these from the very beginning. It helped so much with my productivity, and I just couldn't imagine a more beautiful device until this thing showed up. And then I was like, I gotta have that. And why did we have to have this? Why did this go out so quickly? Well, the answer is this was just painfully simple. It didn't make you think. While this had a lot of functionality, it made you think. And infamously, there's a story of Jobs challenging the engineering team to say, you only get one button on the face. Now, there's a new book that comes out where an engineer actually claims that Jobs also wanted a back button, and he talked him out of it. But culturally, as a team, they really agreed that simplicity was where it was at, and they were right. I want to crib now from a gentleman named Simon Sinek. Now, I would write that down, and you can watch his many TED Talks, but he does just put in the golden rule in Simon Sinek, and really, he talks a lot about organizations and how they work from a marketing standpoint or an operational standpoint. But this speech that he gives is so great about distilling things down to the simple. Even though he doesn't use those words, for me, that's what he's talking about. And he's basically saying there is a core purpose in every organization. And in fact, let me do this. I'm going to put up his exact words, and then I'm going to crib from them just for a second. So I'm totally lifting here from Simon Sinek. Please go look at his materials. But, okay, the what. Every organization on the planet knows what they do. These are products they sell or services they offer. They often understand the how, okay? These are the things that make them special or set them apart from their competition. But it's the why that so few organizations understand. Why is not about making money. That's a result. It's a purpose, cause, or belief. It's the very reason your organization exists. So I encourage every one of you to pursue in your organization a culture of why. So what is this? And it's really, just make it super simple. Everything that is important to you, challenge it by asking why you do it within your organization. But at a fundamental level, so you talk to a lot of lawyers and you look at a lot of their advertising. So whether it's internal communications or external communications, they'll do a lot of, what? We practice law. How? Well, we have a group of lawyers that goes to court, and you should hire us. Awesome. Okay. Instead of, we believe that every family has a right to a respectful dissolution. And as a consequence, we are a group of lawyers and mediators that work to bring families together as much as we can, to bring civil dissolutions to the very unfortunate end of a marriage. And talking about that why, to where what is their purpose? We believe everyone has a right to a fair trial. Whatever it is, starting with that, and then talking about how, maybe you do believe in everyone having a right to a fair trial, and so how have you done it? You've brought in a group of both public defenders and ex-prosecutors, and as a consequence, you have delivered a firm that is the best in your locale at helping people with criminal justice issues. But if you don't start from the why on your way in, and so many lawyers are doing the what, and only the what and the how, but at a minimum they're just going in from this direction, you just don't, there's no magic in it. There is no sense of like, okay, we're really doing this for a reason. And to the extent that you can get that why boiled down, then it leads to very simple conversations within your organization to say, this is why we do what we do. So as a consequence, this year we're going to set these objectives, and you set of people are going to pursue this objective, you're going to pursue this objective. When you start with the why, your conversations become so simple internally. And I alluded to this, but it also makes your external conversations simpler. This is a television advertisement, but being able to say that we believe that people, when they are in accidents, are often the victims of the insurance companies, and we don't like that. Being able to talk about that why, and believe it or not, that also gets you back to the obsession, right? It gets you back to that core purpose of who you are as a firm. And it's those leaders that are obsessed, boil it down to the simplest parts, and then talk about the how and the what. Those are the true leaders. And you can all do that within your own firms. Okay. How are we doing on time? If I need another half hour, Jack said I could have it. Unless he's here. I told you I hadn't given this before. No, I think we'll be in good shape. Opportunity. So to really demonstrate this point, I want to talk to you about a new service. And this new service, as we have cars, probably started with Tesla, but other cars are getting this functionality to where they have a giant LCD screen that drives a bunch of the functionality within the car. And this is really the future of all cars, because then you don't have to update all the componentry. You can update it just through a software update. So the new concept is that should you be pulled over by the police, or should you get into an accident, a lawyer will be automatically triggered, and that lawyer will pop up on your screen and will walk you through your legal issue, especially dealing with the police or dealing with the accident. Okay, let's start with how many think that this is a bad idea? Go ahead, come on. How many think this is a bad idea? Okay. Why is this a bad idea? Right up front. I know, sorry, it's no good deed goes unpunished, but why is it a bad idea? Because they're what? Because they're at a vulnerable state in their lives. Okay, it's totally fair. There were other hands. Don't put them down now. Why is it a bad idea? Yes, sir. Police officer's going to beat your ass. Is that what you're saying? Okay. All right. What else? I won't prolong this. That's issue spotting. Issue spotting is what we do as lawyers, and it is actually what makes you successful. So I don't want to beat the behind of issue spotting because it's really important. It's what got you through law school. It's what got you through the bar, and it's what puts money on the table, right? But it doesn't help you be a better business person. Business people are opportunity spotters. And I hesitate to put this photo up because the minute I put this up, people are like, okay, so I have to have an iPad and process all this data, and I got to be really cool and techie. No. But what you have to do is realize that you have this hyper-functioning part of your brain that has brought you goodness for decades, that it just likes to point out everything that's wrong about everything. That's what you do as lawyers. And turning that off is so hard. But the problem is that it keeps you from moving forward towards any opportunity because that issue spotting brain is just like chugging, and saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Now, when I say turn it off, I don't want you to turn it off permanently, but maybe we could practice on turning it off for a little while. So I've counseled lawyers for years. Sit down, pen and paper, keyboard and screen, whatever your favorite medium, I don't know, rock, sticks, I don't care. But just say to you or your team, we will not talk about issues. We are going to talk about the next year, what we would like to accomplish, and no one may raise an issue. And another way, some of you may have seen this. This gets thrown around a lot. I think it's the same. It's just another way of saying it. What would we do as a team? What would we attempt to do if we knew that we couldn't fail? If we knew there were no issues? We can bring up the issues later, but let's plan. Let's try to be innovative in our opportunity spotting to talk about those things that we could do if the issues didn't get in the way. And I'm telling you, I have had so many lawyers come back to me over the years and say, it works. We were able to think through some elements that we were having, I had an attorney tell me, she said, we just could not figure out in some of our operations why we were dropping so many leads from intake to the time that it was getting to the people who were supposed to be picking up the phone to actually the lawyers working on the case. And so they started brainstorming on what are some of the things they could do in an attempt to get through this, and it opened up the doors to a lot of interesting software and solutions that they previously felt were unseemly. But so what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? Be an opportunity. If you want to get over to Venus, you must be as good of an opportunity spotter as you are an issue spotter. Think about your business from an opportunity perspective, then think about the issues and go after the things that feel like they fit within your risk parameters. Now, risk parameters. Let's talk about risk. Now, very similar to when I talked about obsession and racking up all the money on the credit cards, when I talk about risk, lawyers, man, this just makes their heads spin around. The idea that you would bring any risk into your lives, maybe not any, but risk has that word to where it's like, it's unstructured, it's going to Vegas, snorting a bunch of Coke, drinking a bunch of brandy, and just going all in. That may be fun, but that's not what I'm talking about. Business people love risk because they're obsessed, because they've seen the future through that obsession, because they're curious and they've investigated it as much as they possibly can because they love to be curious and investigate things. They've broken it down to the simple parts. And then they say, okay, I think we got it. Let's take a risk. And this is Richard Branson's Facebook feed from some time ago, 2012. But I just love, I saw this guy talk in Seattle a couple of years ago, and he's a self-promoter, but man, I really like his approach to the corporate world. But he says, every risk is worth taking as long as it's for a good cause and it contributes to a good life. And the only way that I can recharacterize this is to say this is structured risk-taking, because basically you become obsessed about something, you boil it down to the why. Like, why would we do this? Well, we would do this because this type of target audience, this type of customer is not being served. And so it is worth taking a risk here, because to not take that risk would be wrong. I call that structured risk. It's not just pushing it all out and just like, hey, let's see what happens. That's not what business people do. Another, Mark Jacobs, the clothing designer, I love this quote. Change is a great and horrible thing. And people love it or hate it at the same time. And in fact, within your firm, within your industry, no matter what you do, I mean, I'm telling you, at Avo, once we got really big, no matter what I did, a lot of people loved it, a lot of people hated it, because it was change. But without change, you just don't move. And I would argue that's where we are as a legal profession right now. So, in fact, I argued that so strongly that I launched a company that had a lot of lawyers, and maybe some of you in this room go absolutely batshit. So much so that a group of them sued us 9 days after we launched. 9 days! Could we give the product a little bit of time to see if it might help legal consumers? Here I am, along with my 1 to 25 John Does. 2 lawyers sued us under the Washington Consumer Protection Act, saying what we were doing within Avo was fundamentally hurting Washington consumers. And it was so hurtful to them that we had about 100 million coming through every year by the time we sold Avo, with 370,000 lawyers using it as a marketing platform. I think we were onto something. I was willing to take this risk because, as I talked about, getting up in the middle of the night in Italy and just feeling like when it comes to that legal consumer, no one's serving it in a meaningful way. No one was taking the time. What consumers told us fundamentally is that they didn't hire lawyers because of 2 things. One, they didn't know what they did. When Jack sat up and talked about all the access to justice stuff this morning, the big driver is there because your potential customers don't know what you do. I know it seems unfathomable, but believe me, most of them don't, more than most of them. The other thing is they just knew that lawyers were too expensive. That's those 2 things. That's all. That's 80% of the equation. I don't know what this person does, but I do know that they would just cost me way too much money. And I said, that is a mistake because I come from a family of lawyers. I am a lawyer. I'm married to a lawyer. I know the problems that we solve for our communities. You guys bring so much goodness to our world. Can't we tell that story a bit better? And that was the genesis of Avo, and we were sued 9 days after we launched. And a couple of times every year thereafter. You guys love to sue. Thank you. Now, when it comes to the bars, so I touched on, I said that I feel that this is where we're stuck. We just don't change because it's hard. And I love this cartoon because I feel like when the bars wave their hands and talk about, and the Supreme Courts, about change, this is what it sounds like to me. I want you to find a bold and innovative way to do everything exactly the same way it's been done for 25 years, except in this case it would be hundreds, if not thousands of years. And, so I was having a conversation this morning with a lawyer that will go unnamed. It's right there. And he was talking about all of the good things that are happening in the different state bars. And I just said to him, I said, are they acting or just talking? And he had to pause and think about that. Hey, everybody in the room, please take this back to your bars. It's time to stop talking. Okay. Thank you. We got to take action, and I'll tell you the real plague. Here is just part of the just messed up process. The non-binding advisory opinion, whoever came up with this should be tarred and feathered and quartered, possibly. Because what happens is anyone that attempts to be innovative, the lowest common denominator, the least innovative, the least risk-taking lawyer, the least obsessed lawyer in the bar, goes to them and gets a non-binding advisory opinion that says, essentially, you can't do it. But the way the bar makes themselves feel better is they say, well, it's not binding. But the problem is all the bar needs to say is, we're not sure, and all of you freeze, which is appropriate. I'm not being critical. I feel sorry for the bars in a lot of ways because they're understaffed and they don't have the technological know-how. They don't have teams of engineers. But we can't solve it with this. This is allowing people to say, I don't like change and I'm going to freeze it. Risk means failure. And this is one thing, as just an aside, I could do a whole speech on accepting risk, accepting failure. But because lawyers don't like taking risks, when something goes wrong, they feel that they have just collapsed as a business person. They feel like they don't know what they're doing. For every quote-unquote failure in your firm, is it a wall or is it a stepping stone? Believe me, I've failed so many times. There's that old saying like, progress crawls on its belly like a gorilla. You're going to fail over and over. You're going to feel some days like you suck. You're not going to succeed in so many of the things you try. But if you never try, you are never going to improve that firm. You are never going to move to your obsession of serving your customer at the level that you want and need. Embrace failure. Now, don't do it on appeal in front of the Supreme Court, but think about some of the places that you can take more risk and potentially fail. Like, these are all the things, I'm just putting together all the functional areas of a firm. Operational, people, regulatory, IT, all these areas go into building a firm. There are absolutely areas on this wheel where you can take more risk. And it's sitting down with your team to say, what if we could not fail? Where on this wheel should we take more risk? Sit down with the wheel, get the issue spotting out of the room, and figure out where you might take some risks in the name of your obsession in order to drive your firm forward. Okay, communication. Now, when it comes to so I talked about how a lot of people characterize CEOs and they go, yeah, they're super smart. It's the same with communication. Almost everybody says, yeah, to get to be a CEO, you need to be like super charismatic and super funny and all these other pieces. And, well, yeah, you're right. No, I'm joking. I don't know how many CEOs that I've spent time with. Let's just use the Bill Gates example again. Sorry, this is recording. Please don't ever give this to Bill. But have you spent time with him? Have you heard him speak? He does not enjoy speaking. He's very curious, but this idea of getting up and being the rah-rah guy, that's just not his gig. And yet, he is an amazing leader. So why is that? Well, I believe that great communicators are really those that assemble all these different pieces. If people really believe that you have been struck by lightning and that you care at a fundamentally deep level and are obsessed, and you are somebody that is going to go and be curious to learn the different parts of your business and what's going well and not going well, whether it be with the customers or the employees or your processes. And you're going to be a student of distilling it down to the most simple chunks so that you can have those simple conversations both internally and externally. And then you're going to pursue opportunities, you're going to appreciate risk, you're going to appreciate failure. When you get up to go talk to your people, internally or externally, it's going to be a super simple conversation. But you got to be a student of these elements in order to get there. I want to add a couple other pieces to this. So it is the sum of these parts, I believe, but it's also about being present. So I talked about the walking down the hall, in passing, asking questions. Especially as organizations get bigger, it is very easy for you as a leader to hide in your office or to hide outside of the office. I'll give you a great example. When I was a law clerk, I did a lot of work with a partner who I was always just curious. I guess it was consistent with this, but how he ran his day. How did a senior rainmaking partner succeed within our firm? And so I would often say to his admin, hey, where is John? During a review one time, he sat down and he said, I hear you've been asking my admin quite a bit where I am. And I said, yes. And he said, it's not any of your business where I am. I left that firm as quickly as I could get out of there because this was a person that was not present, that this person wasn't curious about me. To be a leader, you need to take the time and talk to your employees individually. And I'm just telling you, it takes a heck of a lot of time. I used to have an office that was all glass on two sides so everyone could see me and come into my office and interrupt me all the time because that's really where I learned. So I could do my one-on-ones on a weekly basis with those that reported to me, but I learned the most when I skipped over them, and it's especially like in sales. I would go all the way down and talk to the salespeople on the floor, and that would help me understand really what was going on in the organization. That doesn't work through email. It doesn't work from you being outside of the office. You must be present. You also must be transparent. So, I don't know, I used to have a saying within Avo that be careful what you ask me because I'll tell you the truth. And I think that became a pretty solid mantra for us because people knew that I was giving it to them straight. Now, we had some challenges. I mean, like when you're selling the company, you can't be like, hey, we're thinking of selling the company. Like we had to keep some things on the down low at different times because we just didn't want employees to freak out about stuff. But I think especially in meetings, I think anyone that worked within Avo would say, Mark in a respectful, and sometimes to different degrees of aggressiveness, would say, this isn't a good idea. And do you know who was notorious for this? And not to bring everything back to Bill Gates. But do you know remember how I said, that is the stupidest effing thing I've ever heard? That was Bill's signature line in product reviews. Everybody thinks of Bill as like, you know, the whole Gates Foundation, what have you. When Bill was really upset, he would constantly say, that is the stupidest effing thing I've ever heard. And in a way, you can get insulted by that, but it was also him just being a super honest communicator. And when you communicate honestly like that, it filters into the organization. I'll close this section with this idea that I would offer to every employee when they would come to work at Avo. We would do a orientation similar to this and sit down and talk with them about what it meant to work at Avo. And I always used to say to them, if you think of your simplest and most successful relationships, just chalkboard simple, fill in whatever you want here, but it is that relationship that you really treasure. It's about being honest. It's about communicating to people really how you feel, listening to them, asking lots of questions, being curious. But when it comes to relationships and communication at work, we throw it all out the window. We get territorial, we get passive-aggressive. I mean, it's just weird stuff to where, I don't care what the relationship is, whether it's with a spouse or a significant other or a sibling or a parent or a pastor, whatever it is. Whatever is the relationship that is valuable to you, think about why it works. And it's because you just are so transparent, direct, and honest. And as a consequence, you trust each other. And then you go into work and you do all the opposite stuff. Don't do that. Mars, Venus, it's a metaphor. All I can hope for is that we do a better job as a profession in realizing, A, that we're already here, but that we must put together the educational steps in order to move over and be a part of that Venus, that business world, that planet that we're already on. And what I guess what I would ask is that every one of you, the next time we come together, if you don't feel that you're a passport card-carrying member of both planets, maybe we can get you there over the coming years. By the way, I think we should give a round of applause to ClioCon because they do a good job, an amazing job of trying to close this gap. So hands off to ClioCon. And I'll just close with this slide. All is not lost in legal. I mean, I love this website. There are a lot of lawyers out there. They're just excellent business people, phenomenal business people, and they put together copy. And we could do a whole presentation on marketing and website design, etc. But I saw this when I was looking around for photos, and I said, all is not lost. We're on our way. I offer all of you the best of travels from Mars to Venus. Thank you.